Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Breaking the Silence, a podcast where we talk about addiction, mental health, and people's triumphs. I'm very, very honored to have Jonathan Arenburg, author, mental health advocate, a person that really gets people into understanding what recovery looks like, and we're here to talk about those kinds of things. So thank you for joining me today and joining the show, John.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
So you're an author.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And you recently, or maybe not recently, but you have a book out there called Wired to Be a Human.
Yes, it was released not too long ago in June, somewhere about, I can't remember the exact date, but I did publish it in June this year. It's called Wired to Be Human.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that book, right? Like, we'll get a little bit into the personal story and things like that, but I just want to know because, when I read that title, I really was enthralled with the name of it. Wired to be, right? Because I think in our culture, our society, anything that we pretty much do these days, it's almost like, we're expected to go full throttle, right? Whatever our profession is, right? And, we forget, or I forget sometimes about, what I'm a human being. So with that comes mistakes, with that comes lessons, with that comes tragedy, with that comes triumphs. And we're supposed to be feeling these emotions and feeling these, things that come up for us, right? So when I saw Wired to Be Human, I thought, okay, like, here's a sense of some normalcy here. I got to remember that I am human. I got to remember that people that are around me, the people I work with, the people I, have relationships with, everybody is human. So it's so important. So tell me a little bit about that book and that vulnerability piece for you then, and how that kind of started.
Well, I've always been looking for, I always look for pieces of the puzzles, what's not being met in terms of need or maybe a way that can help others see things in a different perspective that may help guide their healing journey in a way that they've never thought about before. And Wired to Be Human is basically about how our ancient threat detection system, which is your anxiety center of the brain, the amygdala, which is responsible for your fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and all that. That's an ancient system that we've had for a long time, and it's been there as a survival tool to help us, avoid being eaten, or, maybe if we have to have a conflict with another group of people back before thousands of years ago. And my contention here in this book is that the modern world is incompatible with that, because there's so much stimulus and so much fear-based narrative that's floating out there that's causing so much division that I feel like we're kind of low-key anxious, or most people are today. And so my idea is that's kind of incompatible with how that anxious systems, or threat detection systems, I like to call it, is, it's meant for a short burst of you better run, or you better fight. But now it's kind of dialed in all the time on one level or another, and it's causing a lot of mental health problems. We go into self-preservation mode, and all these kind of things that make us turn inward and make society more of a individualistic driven society as opposed to a communal one. And the other idea behind Wired to Be Human is that you have a neurological system that is being activated on a regular basis. And the hope if people know that or learn that they'll be able to reduce the shame they feel around it, because they'll have a answer to, okay, there's a mechanism by which this is being driven. I'm not actually, I'm not actually, how do I put that? So, there's something driving it, which is, I don't have to feel so much shame around, because, and so then the answer becomes, what can I do to help minimize, the activity that goes on with that anxious brain? right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the book further goes on to explain solutions to that constant priming of the amygdala and so on. And that is like social connection. There's a lot of good research out there on the importance of social connection and how it relates to longevity. And in our society, we've kind of moved away from social connection, like ensuring that we make time for our loved ones and so on. And I go in and talk a little bit about what I call toxic individualism, which is like the extreme end of being individualistic. Like perhaps maybe your desire to go home and shut the door after work is isolating rather than healing, because a lot of people today sort of think, or I feel like that the trend is to go home, shut the door, and that's my idea of self-care. But that can be helpful, but we also have to be mindful of the line by which we're robbing ourselves of healing by all the other necessary things like nature, social connection, and many other things. Good diet,
Yeah. I think you talk about the amygdala, right? And how our brain at some period, starts to get comfortability in those things, right? So I think that if you do something for a long period of time, like shut the door and go to your room after a long day of work, it starts to just become the sense of normalcy, right? And I think that individuals these days, people that come in here that struggle with addiction, even though it's becoming consequential, or has been consequential, your brain is telling you that this is the only thing that you sort of know because it's comfortable, it's familiar,
right?
Like, do you find that is a big piece to why social isolation has become more prevalent over the last 10, 15 years or so, especially with the creation of, the internet, social media, technology? It just gives people that vehicle to just really be by themselves. Video games, those things.
Yeah. Well, all those things seem to have an addictive component to them. So there's a reward-based element by which, you get likes and notifications and things. So it's very tempting to stay locked in, because the whole idea is to stay on the platform. But the ironic thing is the more we're supposedly connected, the less connected we are, because you need human connection, right? This is what I call this, what we're talking about is convenience culture, is what I refer to it in the book, right? And we've, over the last 10 or 15 years, we've learned to associate comfort with help. Comfort equals helpful, right? And that comes with a convenience culture that we talk about. But reality is that our brains are primed for challenge, right? You need to be in that uncomfortable zone in order for growth to happen. So I think that people are so used to the ease of today's modern world that they just don't give it another thought. Like, that might be a little bit more hard, but it's easier to do this. So, right?
For sure.
Exercise, for example, is a good one.
Yeah, for sure. Right? Absolutely. I mean, the instant gratification, right? It's the gravitational pull towards what's going to give me the most amount of reward, what's going to stimulate the reward pleasure center in the middle part of my brain. That's going to help me just feel the most amount of pleasure, right? And that's where people sort of trail away into these process addictions, into substances, into alcohol, all of those things, right? So it's such an important piece to understand that there is ways to be able to retrain your brain, and we're looking at healthy outlets here to do that, right? It might not be something that you feel the immediate gratification towards, but I think that being able to be consistent with it at some point starts to pay off, just like any habit would, right? Just like
that's right. Yeah.
Yep. So tell me a little bit about your years as a firefighter, witnessing trauma, maybe that no person should really see. And can you take us to that moment where you started to feel like you had some connection or consciousness around your body and keeping score and really understanding that, like, it wasn't just memories that you were carrying, but it was maybe a biological response.
Well, first of all, yeah, when you're a firefighter, your first initial dose of brain chemistry is adrenaline, and so you're running high already when you get to a place. I think it kind of might set you up for a little bit of a surprise when you when you actually first encounter your first tragic moments. I was 19 when I first witnessed my first death in the fire service, and the person sadly had burnt to death. And interestingly enough, I feel like I wrote an article once. I called it "Carbon Monoxide and Post-Traumatic Stress: How Are They Similar?" In terms of like emergency service. And I just felt like one incident after another happened that slowly accumulated to make it intense enough for me to go, "Hey, there's something wrong here." And so, like, I saw my ex-wife's cousin who was killed in a car accident, which I helped extricate, and a lot of number of incidents that had really taken a toll on my overall well-being. But the sad thing is that where I worked, I worked on one of the most violent units in the province, where all the violent people lived. So you would go to work, and your threat detection system would be on all day, and you would witness violence and all that kind of stuff. So between that and the fire service, not really sure what. And this is the thing that's so troubling when you get into therapy. They've tried to dig it up in terms of what was the actual incident that sent me down the road of trauma, but I really can't nail it down. Which one is it? You take your pick.
Yeah.
And so what I've done and is worked on symptom management in terms of it's all in my body. I'm not sure what the incident was, and so let's just work on like practicing meditation and when I bring up a certain after effect, which I mean by after effect is I have a visceral reaction to people speeding on highways, right? Because I've seen what highway death can do and irresponsible driving can do. And so I get my therapist to help me deal with that reaction that's born out of these events that I really can't nail down, like to do an EMDR, for example. It's just not. So from a therapeutic point of view, and for other people, it really is a customizable experience, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a piece in your book that you talk about where you said that you thought that you defeated your demons and you stopped counseling. You called it a colossal mistake. What happened when you stopped listening?
Well, I think because of the enormity of my own problems, right? I just didn't have it in me. There was a point where I ran the other way when somebody had any problem whatsoever. So I think for me it was way too much, especially at the peak. The peak when you're trying to figure out what's wrong with you and stuff, you don't have as many tools in your belt as you should have. Awareness of this is going on because I'm having maybe too many startle responses today and I'm irritated. You don't know all that stuff in the beginning, right? So my cup was just way too full for anything else. So I kind of felt like those days were behind me.
Right. I mean, it must be hard to, feel like everything is, it's just too much to be able to process, too much to be able to sort of continue to navigate through, and then, get yourself to that place where you kind of feel like you're stuck.
Well, I was definitely stuck. Not only like from a mental health perspective, but also from red tape and all that. See, in Nova Scotia, post-traumatic stress disorder is considered a work injury. So through the fire service, I'm now on workers' compensation. And so that was another mess that you had to deal with at that time. And unfortunately, and you probably see it a lot in your practice, my life around me, the very life that I was trying to save, like build a good quality relationship with my kids and have a family and all that, just kind of fell apart, right? My kids were small when I was first going through all this unrealized symptoms in terms of, I don't know what this is yet. And they didn't understand. So, it took a toll on them, the reactivity, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So,
this is just a question for our listeners, but one of your other core messages, which I found to be interesting, was you wrote there, biology before belief. First of all, what do you mean by that? And then for listeners that may be blaming themselves for anxiety, depression, PTSD, sort of all the things that, they're exposed to or have some, relevant awareness towards, when they don't understand that, that isn't a character flaw, but maybe something in your nervous system doing what it's designed to do. What did you mean by that?
Well, that's exactly what I meant. I didn't mean it in a religious context where biology is reigns supreme. In fact, the wire to be human is just a piece of the puzzle. It's my angle of the healing process. So there's spiritual, but the neurobiology of it all doesn't get talked about as much in terms of for lay people, for everybody. And so biology for belief means that you have your reaction and how your brain will deal with things comes first, right? And sometimes it can be, environmental, a reaction to the environmental situation, addiction, for example, what's going on neurologically that's causing you to feel anxious or whatever. So that title means that you need to think about what's going on with our biology first, and maybe that can help explain or minimize the shame, right? Because that's really what I'm really working towards, is trying to minimize. One of the questions I asked myself in terms of my goal for this book was, what can we do to minimize suffering of people and propel them towards the road to mental wellness? And I thought, if they knew a little bit about, okay, your anxiety system is primed and it's going, and it can interfere with rational decision making, and so poor decisions can be made, and their reactivity is up, and we argue rather than negotiate. So those things, so maybe somebody opened it up and go, gosh, that's me, that's going on with me, but it's not. I'm not. I don't want to say not responsible for it. That's not what I mean. But there's a reason why I'm behaving the way I am. Like I always say, behavior happens for a reason, and when you figure that out, then a lot of times it's something that you can work with.
Yeah.
So that's what it means.
You talk a lot about, you just mentioned it again, like shame and, not really wanting to sort of expose or communicate that. You talk about that in your book with male mental health specifically. You talk about how men are urged to break silence, but when they do, they're met with a lot of disbelief. Like, maybe that didn't happen to you, or wasn't that bad, or, how do you feel like in the context, men being dismissed shape the understanding of why maybe they, some of them or lots of us do stay silent?
Well, it's. I think you alluded to it there. If you don't have anybody that's going to believe you or listen to you, or you feel like you're safe enough to communicate with because you're dismissive, the person's dismissive, then the logical thing for most of us to do is, okay, well, why bother, right? I've had some personal issues within the helping community myself. It's a personal story. I allude to it in the book a little bit, but I was basically sexually assaulted in the workplace. I worked with women for 8 years by myself, and I witnessed a lot of the behaviors that women go through. And so this mental health professional that was helping me at the time, I just confessed this to them, and they were like, "Well, we got to get you back to work." And I said, "Wait a minute, would you say that to a woman who's here asking for your help? Would you advocate to put them back in that workplace?" She goes, "No." I said, "Why would you do that to me?" So the reason I use that example is because, and it's nothing against the mental health professional. It just illustrates our social our social ideas around, men versus women in terms of, oh, you can't be assaulted, or maybe, that there's a lot of lingering mythology around things, and we might communicate them even in a professional setting. So, and do you really feel like talking?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that was we established a trust, right?
Right.
And I felt safe enough to tell her that, and then boom, right?
Yeah.
It took several more years to be able to crawl out of that hole.
Well, of course, right? I mean, I think we associate a lot of our experiences to what then becomes our narrative, right? And, when we have experiences that maybe not go so well, or there's this level of like shock, it's very easy for us to just avoid that and have our brain say like, no more of this. I'm not going to continue to entertain that, right? So I think that that's something that, is always encouraged to be able to sort of break that trend, for people that struggle, right? And you talk a lot about healing being a really dramatic, or is really dramatic or instantaneous. It's the small consistency of actions, which I love that piece, because again, it's like we always look for a way to get everything done in the quickest way possible and sort of move on. But the consistent and persistent action of just day-to-day things, right? And what does that look like in your life today? And what would you say to someone listening who knows that they need to do this, but maybe doesn't know where to start, or maybe feels like they can't start anywhere?
Well, for me, my life is very similar from day to day because I am retired. But because I've realized through research and my background and just my pure interest in my experience, that there are certain things that we know to be true that will help you, and as a factual based kind of answer. And that one of those is social connection we talked about. It's, studies show that longevity and stuff. So I in the book, I call it forced socialization. And so basically what that says is whether you want to be social or not, it's good for you. So you have to figure out a way to do that. And that can be incremental. So, for example, if you have a good friend and you can go out for coffee for 20 minutes, and then that's enough, then go home. But that's a monumental step. That's a small step forward, but a monumental step at the same time, because you got out and you were social and you connected with somebody you care about, and you might have had a laugh or two or whatever, but the noise in the environment around you is too chaotic. So that in that respect, you set boundaries with yourself, and but you're also getting that social connection that humans are wired to have.
Right. I mean, look, I think that's a very honest answer, and I do feel like that level of encouragement can go a long way, and just being able to share your experience, your strength, and your hope with listeners is a huge piece, because this podcast is called Breaking the Silence. And the last question I have for you is, if you can go back and tell that young firefighter who was suffering, who hadn't faced PTSD, what would you say to him, and what silence are you most committed to breaking?
What I would say to him, well, I've answered this question in my head several times, is like, don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't put yourself through it. But I would say that if you want to help your community, it's needed, and some sort of sacrifice has to be made. But in the helping fields, like even your line of business, it is imperative that you make sure that you are mentally fit and physically fit and doing the things that you need that will help you be more resilient and able to function through those things. And within that fire service, there's a big stigma, right? There's a big silence behind, talking about post-traumatic stress. I was just talking to a firefighter that I'd never worked with the other day, but he's in the same department. And I said, "Do they do a lot of talking about post-traumatic stress?" And he's like, "Nope." So that's one silence I would like to break. And people be encouraged to, in the emergency services, to come forward and say, "Hey, look, it's not weakness to come forward, right? Trust me, it takes an incredible amount of strength to put yourself in a position where you want to get better."
Yeah.
And so the silence thing there is a good news about the silence is that I've noticed is that more men seem to be going to see therapists more than they used to. So that's a positive sign. But I would like to see more in order to break that silence so that men can feel well enough to go out and do it. I think there has to be more awareness of what is taking place for men. Instead of every other meme you see is men never seek help. And I always see these memes and they're like, to me, from my perspective, they feel like they're blaming men. Maybe it's my perception, but men never do this and men always do that. And there's a social component to that, like there's men that have suffered horrible divorces and systemic problems, like I just mentioned within care. There's not all of the things. You can't lay everything on the lap of an individual and expect them to thrive, right? It's just gonna bury them. Mm-hmm. So, like, if you can get and it doesn't matter if it's men, women, or whatever it is, when you put out the right messages and you show the progress that's being made, then it's going to inspire hope. And if that guy can do it, then I can.
Absolutely. We're here with Jonathan Arenburg, author, Wired to Be Human. Looks like a very, very amazing read. I will be picking up and reading it because, it's definitely something that I feel I could use for my own, recovery and my own sort of awareness. And, I really thank you very much for taking the time to meet with me today and do this podcast. And I also want to thank our listeners who are listening today. Once again, my name is Allen Kharlip. You're listening to Breaking the Silence, and we'll see you all next week. Jonathan, thank you for being on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.